Welcome back to Goals. Today I want to give you a little recap from last week, just so we're all on the same page. First, we're looking at a book from the Old Testament of the Bible called Nehemiah, and this book was written by, you guessed it, Nehemiah. Surprise, surprise. About 140 years before this book was written, the Jewish people were conquered by an enemy army. The army destroyed their city, they burned down the temple where they worship, and they sent many of God's people into exile. But God promised that one day the Jewish people would return. That's a very hopeful, awesome promise. So when we get to the book of Nehemiah, some of God's people had already begun to return to Jerusalem, and they were looking to rebuild what they lost. And this was a long, lengthy, just tiring process. So Nehemiah shows up, and his passion is about seeing Jerusalem restored and rebuilt. But he saw a huge problem. Even though some people were living in the city, the walls were destroyed. They had zero protection from another enemy. And not only that, but leaving the walls destroyed didn't honor God. If they rebuilt the walls, it would be a symbol that they were returning back to not just the city, but also back to God, and that they were choosing to be obedient to God. So Nehemiah sets this God-sized goal to rebuild the walls of his city so that God's people would be protected, number one, and also so that God would be honored. So this guy has a goal, that's great, but what about a plan? How was he going to get this done? Last week we mentioned this. We mentioned that Nehemiah prayed. The first thing he did was prayed, and he fasted and he prayed for months. We read this in Nehemiah chapter 1 verse 4. We read, "When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned and fasted and prayed to the God of heaven." And then we continue on into verse 11. We read, "O Lord, please hear my prayer. Listen to the prayers of those who delight in honoring you. Please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me. Put it into his heart to be kind to me." Now there are three things that I notice in these verses. Number one, Nehemiah didn't ask God for step-by-step instructions. He knew that God wanted him to lead the charge to rebuild the walls, and that was enough. He didn't say, "I'll just sit and wait for you to tell me what to do next." He was passionate, he followed instructions, and he started to do what he needed to do to get the job done. Secondly, by the time Nehemiah was at the end of his prayer, he was already working on his plan. We read that in verse 11, that he asked God to help him be successful in what he was about to do, and that was talking with the king. Which brings us to point number 3. He was a cupbearer to the king. This is helpful information to know, but I think it has another purpose. It shows us that Nehemiah was making note of the resources God had already given him. Because he was a cupbearer, this guy had access and influence with the most powerful person in the kingdom. To sum it all up, Nehemiah planned while he prayed. And so what goal do you have? And what planning are you starting to do? And if you are starting to plan whatever goal that is, as big or small as you may think it is, don't compare plans, just focus on yours. I hope that while you're planning, you're also praying as well.